Just to remind ourselves that our licence to broadcast, we're actually charged with developing an alternative media service to those already available in the area. So it's not enough for us to say to ourselves or to the BAI, we're doing news and current affairs in a similar format as commercial media or even public service media. So that sort of shakes us out of that sort of complacent position. But it's a blank canvas after that then, and I think that's a really exciting place to be, because in community media we have the freedom to imagine and explore that people in both public service and commercial media don't have. We have huge freedoms here, and it seems to me, it always seems to me to be a pity if we settle for something that's aping or miming what other media are doing when we have this opportunity to explore and do things differently. Now again, to acknowledge, we are doing an awful lot of things differently in music, in sports, in arts, and in consistently featuring human rights and environmental affairs. And we usually try to facilitate those who are involved rather than mediate. We try to allow them space to have their own voice to say these things. So, but news and current affairs, I think, is the last area that we really haven't addressed seriously and decided on a policy on. And some of the questions that I'm putting forward tonight, just to set the ball rolling, are: can we carry out our commitment to human rights and the environment, and can we carry that into news and current affairs content? Should we even see the news bulletin as a new battlefield on these issues? And have we a right to introduce an ideology or opinions into the news? That's just to pause, because some of you are probably saying, no, we shouldn't, but just think about it. How can we respond to critiques of how mainstream media go about telling the stories they select? Most mainstream news agencies, when they react to criticisms about their contents, which often can be quite destructive of human relationships, they generally note that they merely report the news, that they don't make it. So the impact or consequences of what gets broadcast should not be laid at their door. But of course, it's not as simple as that. They have a bigger role in shaping opinions than that. And in fact, at a UNESCO conference recently in Copenhagen on social development, it was observed that the media are now so persuasive and pervasive that they are not merely reporting events, but also helping determine their course. So we need to understand that when we think we're giving out factual news and information, we're purporting to present an ideology or opinions to people. No matter how we try to frame it or convince ourselves that we're being factual, we're all subjective creatures. So media literacy awareness is a thing that we're trying to develop here quite a bit. Will show us that opinions and ideologies constantly seep into mainstream media news and current affairs. As I say, we're all subjective beings. It can't be otherwise. So being aware of our own biases, could we do news and current affairs differently? And could we do it in a way that's more beneficial to our community? For one thing, providing a wider array of information, and Michael touched on this already, you do need to go to, and I think we do it quite a bit, but we need to sort of, as they codify this into a policy that everybody who's doing news and current affairs knows that you don't take your information from one source, you do look for other sources. Because I think our citizens, that will assist our listener citizens to make more considered decisions. And again, to remind ourselves that we're not just a media service, and if we aren't here to make money out of media and content, then why are we here? So looking at news, can I suggest to you that in a sense, the news we get at the moment, we don't really receive news. We receive the same event sort of varied and repeated over and over again. There are variations on a central theme that we get in news. If we're aware of that through media literacy, can we look at doing news differently, that people get a more diverse range of information? Where do we get our news from? It certainly won't suit our ethos to buy news in from commercial news networks, because that would, again, I think, run counter to the sort of content we're trying to develop. So how can we compile our own ethical news? Remember, as I say, we talked about it earlier, a recent listenership survey we carried out showed that local people wanted more human rights than environmental information. Anyway, should we select such topics for inclusion into our news bulletins? And again, we have to ask the question, is this twisting the news to suit our needs? What I suggest to you, maybe the young people particularly, if you listen to music stations, their news bulletins are filled with music news. They tailor their news to suit their audience. So again, if we feel that we have a strong human rights environmental listenership, then our news should cater for that interest group. And what about local news? Could we look at ways to use the new digital technologies to encourage citizens to participate in news gathering? Could we develop a system of citizen journalism? Could we use the actions that occur in collaborative and social media networking to develop online communications and news gathering? Could we call this participatory journalism to describe both the content and the intent of such an approach? This would work when citizens play an active role in the process of collecting, reporting, analysing and disseminating news and information through Near Media Co-op. With suitable training, this participation could provide independent, alternative, accurate, wide-ranging and relevant information that any democracy requires. I'll leave it there, Chair. Participatory journalism is a bottom-up emergent phenomenon which will need to be adjusted to interface with the licensed community media service. Some of the training we would need to put in place for participatory journalism would be to educate about standards, ethics and the role of the media, to educate about technology and responsible interactivity, educate about accurate and fair news, create alternative voices to traditional media, and to honestly inform by declaring biases. And again, I think Michael touched on the charter earlier. AMARC, the International Community Radio Movement, has a charter that is incorporated into our licence to broadcast. And one of the points on it is that we seek to honestly inform our listeners. So again, we need to take this into any policy that we're designing or devising for news and current affairs. So we need to find ways, I'm suggesting, to merge old media, like radio and television, with new media, the new online media, and develop this new conglomerate as a new community development resource. Another idea just to put to you quickly, just 2 more points now we finish. Campaigns. We've talked about this for a long time, and I'm just suggesting that maybe again, as part of a broad news and current affairs remit, we might look at aligning Near Media Co-op and the radio station in particular with campaigns initiated by other groups, so we wouldn't take on the whole workload. But just a couple of examples. The Irish Medical Organisation recently proposed a sort of novel universal healthcare system that I felt had a great deal of merit. It got a few weeks coverage in the papers and then it sort of died a death. Now I think we certainly could offer to the IMO to keep that issue alive, even if it's just in North East Dublin, and to examine it and just see what the ramifications and potentials of it are. A second one would be, currently the Irish Congress of Trade Unions are suggesting a boycott of Israeli goods. Now again, if we were to attempt something like this as a campaign, we would need to be careful that it didn't become an anti-Israeli campaign, but rather that we would be taking a human rights approach to that. So again, we would be working with ICTU, and we could broaden it out beyond that to work with other groups if the thing began to gather momentum. And finally, the Labour Party are suggesting that with 2016 looming, that maybe it's time to revisit our constitution and decide, should we rewrite it for the 21st century, and what type of Ireland do we want? So we might well use that as a campaign, and if you could broaden it out beyond the Labour Party, I'm sure a lot of other people would have opinions on what type of Ireland we'd like by 2016. So I'm just suggesting to you that if we did that sort of campaign as an adjunct to our news and current affairs, it probably could feed into our news and current affairs sort of content. And finally, the only bit I'm saying is, again, it comes back to the point, I think we've all touched on it already, the type of news and current affairs we want to do is to be helpful rather than destructive. So we need to develop a novel approach to facilitating dialogue on contentious issues. And this will require a lot of training. Some people here in Near FM, I'm quite pleased to say, do this almost instinctively, but others tend not to help a situation where there's contention or conflict. So I think we should use our growing store of knowledge about economics and political situations not to exacerbate but to ameliorate them. With training, this approach could impact on our news and current affairs output. Chair, I'd be very happy to see it only a couple of lines on the next page. Anyway, so I'm just suggesting that these approaches, if we decide to implement them, would require new current affairs skills, but they are healing ones. We could use our position as facilitators to encourage antagonists to find what they hold in common and to build on this. Some or all of these approaches would see us developing an alternative news and current affairs service for our community. Such an approach to news would bring significant challenges to us. But that's the beauty of community radio, as I've already said. We have the space to experiment, and we can evolve alternative ways to inform our community and involve citizens in beneficial